Well, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see this, but it's 2 in the morning on October 31st, 2019, Halloween, and I'm standing by my loaded canoe, getting ready to paddle out into the Upper St. Johns River marsh. I figured what could be more spooky and in the Halloween spirit than going canoeing in the middle of a alligator and snake-infested swamp in Florida in the middle of the night. So why don't you come along with me? We'll see what we find. I'm going to tell you a ghost story too while we're out here. It's not a ghost story, it's a story that actually happened to me, and it's somewhat unbelievable, but you be the judge. Man, I can't see anything out here. It is pitch black. It is really something. I don't know if swing this around, show you the jungle there, but you probably can't even see it. There's pretty thick jungle to my left. And on my right, there's a man-made levee, but it's so heavily overgrown that it's like a jungle too. And I had the canoe camouflaged up, so we'll just see what we see here in the darkness. Maybe spotlight some alligators, but I forgot to bring my big, powerful lamp, so these small flashlights and headlamp that I have don't do very good, but if they're close enough to the canoe, we'll see them. And there's some out here they call old tail light, because his eyes are so big they glow red, and they're so big in the reflection of the light they look like car tail lights. Alright, let me get straightened out here, and I'm going to tell you guys a story. So this may seem like a kind of crazy and spooky thing, but I figure the swamp is about as dangerous at night as it is in the daytime. It's just that you can't see things. But I'm a guy who's not afraid of the dark. I have no fear of the dark. I don't even feel uncomfortable in the dark. I'm as happy to be out here at 2 a.m. as I am at 2 in the afternoon. And I have a story about that and why that is. I was always a little nervous in the dark. When I was in high school, growing up, going camping, I'd hear some stick snap out in the darkness outside my tent, and like anyone else, I would be a little apprehensive, wonder what it was. I wasn't afraid of the dark, but you know, your senses are a little more heightened at night. And then in 1984, the year I graduated high school, I joined the Marine Corps. And as soon as I graduated, I went off to boot camp and served in the Marine Corps Infantry from 1984 to 1988. And in 1985, I'd only been in a year, I was still a boot. I got deployed on my first Westpac float, which is a 6-month deployment on ship. And we went to a number of countries, went to the Philippines 3 times, went to Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong. One of the countries we went to was Thailand, and we were there for like 20 days. And half of that, the first 10 days, was an operation out in the field called Cobra Gold. Now, Cobra Gold is a big exercise out in the jungle, and you do all sorts of stuff in a very remote area. You're training with Thai Marines. It was pretty exciting for a young 19-year-old Marine to be doing this. And like our second day out there in the field, we're sitting there with some Thai Marines, and none of them spoke English except one guy, and we were talking with him a little bit. And just before he left, he said, stay up on ridgeline, be careful lowland, be careful of the tiger. And he walks off. And I'm like, did he just say be careful of the tiger? And a couple other Marines are like, yeah, I think that's what he said. I think he said, be careful of the tiger. I'm like, hold on, there's tigers out here? And our gunnery sergeant's like, yeah, listen, coon dog, they called me coon dog. He goes, you know, we're in Thailand, it's one of the biggest jungles in the world. There's tigers out here, just keep your wits about you, and I'm going to check with Lieutenant, but I think we'll be all right. I'm going to keep my wits about me, I keep my M16 about me. Tigers? So everyone's a little freaked out about this. Well, we're sleeping out in the field every night in our little, well, we had shelter halves, but it was such good weather, pretty much every night we just slept out under the stars. And about the 4th night out there, about halfway into the operation, I get guard duty. And we're in this area, we'd actually been there 2 days, and it's, there's like 4 posts, but the 4th post we called the Coyote Post, which is kind of weird in retrospect because there's no coyotes in Thailand, I don't think. But we called it the Coyote Post because it was so far away. And the whole thing about getting this post was that you had to walk out in the middle of nowhere to get to it, and you had to walk through the jungle for like 15 minutes, which it sucked to walk to any post, but especially after hearing about the tigers, this really sucked. So you had 3 guard shifts through the night. Each was 6 hours. The problem is the first one didn't start till like 8 in the evening when everyone was starting to turn in. So he stood till midnight. So he only got like 4 of the 6 hours. The middle shift stood for from midnight to 6 a.m. So that century had to do the whole 6 hours. And then at 6 a.m. you were relieved and everyone was pretty much getting ready to move camp and everything by about 9 or 10 in the morning. So that guy stood only 3 or 4 hours. But I draw, this like 4th night or 5th night, I draw the middle of the night watch. So I'm like, great. Then I draw the coyote post and I'm like, oh, this is just great. I'm tiger bait. So I go out there at midnight and you have to, the sentry who you're leaving will tell you any, pertinent information that he saw or anything strange that happened. So I get out there and this guy named Davenport's there and he says, hey, listen, coon dog man. He goes, I'm not messing with you before I tell you this. I just want you to know about it because it kind of freaked me out. But about an hour ago, something was moving through the brush right here, just outside of the light, and it was big. And we're not in any type, we have a little guard shack. It looks like a plywood phone booth. It has no door on it. You just stand there like some guard at Buckingham Palace. It's just a place to get out of the rain. Then you got this kerosene lamp hanging from a pole. It's like a lamp post out in the middle of the jungle, illuminating about a 10 square foot circumference area of light. And he goes, man, it was right there. It was right outside the light, and it was big. And I listened to him, and I go, oh, bullshit. And he's like, no, I know you were going to say that. I'm telling you, man, it had to be a tiger. And I'm like, it was a deer or something. He's like, no, it was way bigger than a deer. I threw some rocks in there, heard it run off, and it was making a lot of noise as it crushed through the brush. It wasn't a person. I'm like, all right, man, you got me freaked out now. So he leaves. And I stand my post for like 3 hours. It's uneventful. And here's where it gets weird. At about 3 in the morning, I hear something crushing around in the brush, right where Davenport had. And I'm like, oh, come on, this has got to be someone messing with me. I even said something. I was like, oh, there's a tiger in the bushes. I'd better throw a rock at it and scare it off, thinking that if it was some other Marine messing with me, this would spook him out. But the thing just keeps making noise. And then suddenly, I hear it right on the edge of the light. I mean, it's crushing, it's coming my way. And I'm like, I just kind of froze up. I've never been frozen with fear. But I just didn't know what to do. And at that very moment, into the light, 9 or 10 feet away from me, steps a giant tiger. Now, it gets even stranger. Not only was it a giant tiger 10 feet from me, but it's holding in its mouth a dead, bloody monkey. And I don't mean like some little rhesus monkey. I mean, this thing was like the size of a 12-year-old. It was a big, like, baboon-looking monkey. And he's perpendicular to me. I'm looking at him broadside, and then he perceives me, and he turns his head, and he looks right at me. We're looking eye to eye. And as he turns his head and looks at me, the monkey's head, it's got like a broken neck. Tiger's holding it right about the shoulders. The head's hanging down with blood and gore all over it, and the monkey's eyes are open, looking right at me with its tongue hanging out. So just picture my feelings. Tiger staring at me 10 feet away, middle of the jungle, no one around, dead monkey bleeding, staring at me. I was actually frozen with fear. I couldn't do anything. I had an M16 rifle. I even had back then we carried the Springfield 1911 45 caliber pistol, and about 2 years later we switched to the Beretta 9mm. But I had a big bore 45 caliber pistol in a shoulder holster, and I had a M16A1 pistol, which M16A1 rifle, which back then was full auto. So now they go to burst, but back then it was safety, semi, or machine gun. But it was on my shoulder on the sling, and I just stood there. I just stood there staring at the tiger. And the tiger didn't move, and I didn't move. We just looked at each other for what seemed like a minute. It was probably 5 seconds, but it seemed like forever. Suddenly, the tiger drops the monkey right there in the leaves, looks at me, and goes, I kid you not, it goes, and like just got this growl, hunched down like it was going to spring, like a house cat, just, like a 900-pound house cat. And at that very moment, every fiber in my body came alive. I felt sweat actually burst out everywhere. From my ankles to my head, I felt sweat coming out of my skin. I ripped the rifle off of my shoulder, raised it, slammed a magazine from the pouch in, because I didn't have it loaded, slammed a magazine into the magazine well, drew back the charging handle, slammed it forward, took my thumb and went right safety semi full auto and pointed the front sight post right on that tiger's forehead. And the tiger didn't lunge. He just sat there looking at me. And this seemed like it lasted a while, but he was kind of like not swaying back and forth, but he'd take like one step left, one step right. He couldn't figure out what to do. Then after a few minutes, a few seconds probably, seemed like a few minutes, he reaches down, picks up the monkey, and slowly walks away into the darkness. All right, I had to straighten out the canoe there. So anyway, the tiger walks back into the jungle, and I hear him crushing through the brush, getting further and further away from me, pretty much in a straight line. And at this point, I just pretty much come apart. I mean, I'm just breathing heavy. I feel faint. I was pretty stoic through the whole thing, but I'm soaked now in sweat. I'm trembling, and I don't really know what to do. So I pick up the walkie-talkie. I hesitate, and I call the guard shack, which is just like a mile away. And I'm like, yeah, post 9. It takes like a minute or two, and the guy's like half asleep. The corporal of the guard comes on. He's like, yeah, go ahead, coon dog. And I'm like, I didn't know what to say, so I go, I just saw a tiger. And there's like a 30-second pause. And he comes back on and says, say again? And I said, I just saw a tiger. There's another pause, and he comes back over the radio, I kid you not, he goes, oh, bullshit. I'm like, okay, I'm reporting anything unusual as we're meant to do. I just saw a tiger. You might want to send someone out here. I'd appreciate it if you did. So he's like, stand by, and he doesn't even call me back. But like, I don't know, like probably 2 minutes later, I see this Jeep, and they actually like loaded up in a Jeep. And the sergeant of the guard is like in shorts and his t-shirt. He'd been asleep. And the corporal of the guard who's on duty is just like in a soft cover with no weapon and a cartridge belt. And they come zooming up in an M151 Jeep. Jump out. They're looking around. They're like, where's the tiger? I'm like, oh, he's laying down right about, he's gone now. I wouldn't have called you if the thing had been crawling all over me, but I just saw a tiger. And they're like, coon dog, were you sleeping? I'm like, I wasn't sleeping. I haven't been drinking. I saw a tiger. I'm absolutely sure. It was 10 feet away from me. It stood there and watched me for like 5 minutes. I thought I was going to be killed. It was a tiger. It wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't a deer or a log or a shadow. It was a giant tiger like you would see in a zoo, only there were no bars in front of me and him. And they're like, huh, okay, we're going to have to write this up. Now, at this point, I'm going to be relieved in like maybe an hour and a half. And they stay there with me for about half an hour. Then the last hour, I have to stand there by myself, and I spent that hour in no enviable mood, I can assure you. But nothing else happened. Well, the sentry who comes to relieve me is this guy, I forget his name, but they hadn't told him about it. I guess they didn't want to freak him out. So he comes up all, hey, bud, how's it going? Bud, you can go back now. And I'm like, yeah, did they talk to you down at the guard shack? He's, no, I can go to the guard shack. I just came out. I'm like, okay, it's 6 in the morning, so it's probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes before the sun comes up. And I said, listen, whatever his name was, I said, I saw a tiger tonight, and it was right here. I mean, it came right into the circle of light here. I would load your rifle, and I would be ready at all times to be attacked by a tiger. And he looks at me for a few seconds, and I kid you not, he goes, oh, bullshit. I'm like, okay, well, I report it, pass on to the sentry who relieves you all orders from the commanding officer. Anything unusual, I reported it, you're on your own. I didn't really like the guy that much, so I'm like, yeah, if he gets eaten by a tiger, so be it, Semper Fi. So I go back, and I actually fell asleep because I was so exhausted from the experience. Well, at about, what seemed like 5 minutes later, but I think I actually got like an hour's sleep, they wake me up. Now the camp's like 7 in the morning, everyone's starting to get up. And they're like, coon, they want you at the guard shack. I'm like, yeah. So I go down to the guard shack, and the officer of the day, the lieutenant's there. This guy was a tough, hard guy, smart guy. He'd been to Annapolis Naval Academy and stuff. He was our platoon commander. He was our officer. I was just a lance corporal. And he's like, okay, tell me everything that happened. You have to make an entry in the logbook, which we did, but you didn't have to do it till the next day. And if there was nothing significant that happened, you get away with not doing it for a few days. But you were meant to do it right when you came back off shift, but I didn't. So he's like, I want you to put the entry in the logbook, and I want you to tell me before you do that exactly what happened. So I tell the lieutenant everything. He sits there very professionally listening to me. And when I'm finished, he looks at me and goes, "Oh, bullshit." I'm just like, okay, all right, fine. Someone's going to get eaten by a tiger. Have you checked on so-and-so? He's probably dead right now. But that's fine. That's fine. I saw a tiger. And I wasn't acting indignant, but they could tell that I had told this story enough now, and I was sick and tired of telling it, and I was sure of what I saw. I wasn't going to change my story. And the guys knew. I mean, I could see in their faces. They were like, man, he's a little weird, but he's never been a liar. The guy seems like, well, it'd be strange that he would just, out of the blue, make up something so ridiculous. So the lieutenant gets on, back then we used the old PRC 77 radio, which had like a handheld thing, and there was he had a radio man there and everything. So he takes the radio and he calls, I think it was Brubaker 1, which was our call sign, and Brubaker 1 was the battalion commander. That was like the colonel. So I'm like, oh man, this is going up the pipe. So he gets on there and they come back and tell us some like corporal on the radio, his radio man, but he's like, Brubaker 1, go ahead. And he's like, he explains the situation very briefly, and the radio man's like, stand by. The colonel gets on. Now I recognize this Colonel Davis, this is his voice. And he asks again, the lieutenant explains to him again, one of the sentries saw a tiger, I'm not sure what to do, waiting instruction. And the colonel says, sounds like bullshit, but go out there, take like 10 guys, arm yourselves, and look for tracks. If there was a tiger walking around, like the sentry said, you should find some tracks. So I'm like, that's a pretty good idea. That's why this guy's a colonel. So we load up like 8-10 guys in 2 Jeeps, and we go out there. We relieve the sentry. He didn't see. He's like, man, it was quiet out here, nothing, had a good time. I'm like, oh, fine. I can tell half of these guys believe me and half don't, but everyone's freaked out. So I tell them the direction I heard the thing walking, and we fan out into the jungle. And there's nothing. There's not a trail. They're like, you say it was carrying a bloody monkey, right? I'm like, I know it sounds bizarre. Yes, it was carrying like a 100-pound bloody monkey in its mouth. They're looking for blood. We got guys there that grew up hunting deer in Alaska. They're like, we found a blood trail. And I'm like, I can't explain it, but maybe the blood has dried up. Maybe it was the same color as the leaves here. I don't know, but I know what I saw. So the main thing is we can't find any tracks. And, the 700 to 1,000-pound cat walking through the mud, and it was pretty wet ground, would leave some tracks. So the lieutenant says, let's fan out, stay like groups of 2 or stay within sight of someone else. We'll cover like a 100-yard path right up this hillside where he said the tiger went. And if there's tracks, one of us will spot him. So we all fan out, and we'd actually gone quite a ways in the jungle then. We fanned out, and it got messed up, but basically guys were covering a lot more ground. And the lieutenant says, you stay with me, Coondog. And I'm like, yes, sir. So he and I are walking up the hillside. We get separated a little bit, and I called out to him. His name was Sheehan. I said, Lieutenant Sheehan. And I didn't hear him answer. I'm like, oh, I'm just having these visions in my head of, a tiger coming out of the bushes, Lieutenant Sheehan in its mouth. And all of a sudden I kind of hear him at a different, he's like 45 degrees behind me. He's like, oh, here I am. I'm like, oh, wait. We turn around and look at each other. There's like these mangrove-like plants, like banyan trees around us, these giant roots. And between us there's this slick, muddy area with some very short grass. And at the exact same moment, both of us look down, and there's this line of giant tiger tracks leading right between us. I never felt so relieved in my life. And then, as icing on the cake, we bend down and we're looking at him, and there's a trail of blood drops. About every 6 inches, 3 inches, there's a drop of blood, verifying that it was carrying, a bleeding animal. So he's like, well, he goes, Lance Corporal, you were telling the truth all along. I said, yes, sir. And he goes, oh, I knew you were. And I'm like, now I'm going, oh, bullshit. But anyway, this is where it gets even stranger. So he gets on the radio, that guy said walkie-talkies, calls everyone in, tells them to rendezvous back at the Jeeps. We get down there, we drive back, I'm immediately telling guys, hey, we found tracks. They're like, oh, where were they? They go, I mean, they were up, those mangroves are out on the side of the hill before it got real steep. We go back to the base. He calls the colonel. The colonel comes out, shakes my hand, and says, let's go look at these tiger tracks. And they even have a Thai, I think he was an officer, like some Thai major or colonel there. We all go out there again with like one other Marine, I can't remember. We get out and we look for like an hour for these tracks, and we could never find them again. Is that a trip or what? And ever since then, I've never been afraid of the dark. Isn't that a crazy story? Hard to believe, isn't it? It's because it was all bullshit. I made the whole thing up here. Well, everything was true up until me going in the Marines and going to Thailand. I did do that and participate in Cobra Gold, but the rest I made up. But I just thought it'd be fun for Halloween. Hope you enjoyed it.